On October 27th, Russian troops took offensive actions in the Kupiansk-Svatov-Kremina area, although their successes were not confirmed. Military bloggers from Russia reported on October 26th and 27th about Russian troop movements in the vicinity of Avdiivka, which lies 20 kilometers southeast of Kupiansk, and near Torska, 15 kilometers west of Kreminaya. However, there is no confirmation of this information from ISW. The Russian Ministry of Defense indicated that during the previous week, their troops had captured new positions in the Kupiansk area. Other Russian bloggers reported attacks near towns such as Sinkovka, Petropavlovka, Ivaniivka, Nadia, Makiivka, and Kremina. Volodymyr Fityo, spokesman of the Ukrainian Ground Forces Command, noted on October 27 that Russian units in the Kupiansk area are using less ammunition and have reduced the intensity of fire by half due to rainfall. Information from October 27 also indicates the presence of elements of the 15th Motorized Rifle Brigade in the vicinity of Kremina. In turn, sources from Russia informed that on the same day, Ukrainian troops took ineffective offensive actions in the same zone. Sinkovka, Timkivka, 18 kilometers east of Kupiansk, and Sergiivka, 12 kilometers southwest of Svatov. Additionally, a Russian military blogger talked about repelling the attack near Peter and Paul. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, their troops repelled Ukrainian attacks in the towns of During the meetings in Malta, Ukraine and the Netherlands began discussions on a potential security agreement. This initiative is part of the broader context of support for Ukraine by the Group of Seven, G7. The first talks took place on October 28 during a conference focused on ensuring lasting peace in Ukraine. This conference gathered representatives from over 65 countries, including the G7 countries, as well as from South Africa, India, Qatar, Turkey, and other countries of the Global South. Following on from previous peace meetings held in Denmark in June and in Saudi Arabia in August, the meeting in Malta is an important step in the pursuit of peace in the region. Jermak emphasized the symbolic nature of the start of talks with the Netherlands during this conference, pointing to its importance in the context of preventing further escalation of the conflict. The USA, Great Britain, Canada, Japan, and France. It is worth noting that the Netherlands is the first non-G7 country to decide to hold such talks. During the meeting, many issues were discussed, including military cooperation, Ukraine's economic reconstruction, efforts to hold Russia accountable, the implementation of sanctions, and the possibility of using frozen Russian funds. The Netherlands, considered a trustworthy partner of Ukraine, is the sixth country to undertake bilateral talks on security guarantees for Ukraine. On October 27th, Ukrainian troops continued their limited offensive operations in the Bakhmut area, although they achieved no obvious successes. Lieutenant Colonel Volodymyr Fityo, representing the Ukrainian Ground Forces Command, emphasized that Ukrainian forces are conducting a dynamic defense in the Bakhmut area, striving to gain more favorable tactical positions whenever such an opportunity arises. According to information from the Ukrainian General Staff, troops continued offensive operations in this direction: Bohdanovka, Klishchivka, and Kurdyumovka. On the same day, Russian forces also undertook limited offensive operations near Bakhmut, with some successes. In turn, the Russian Ministry of Defense noted that their units, which are part of the Russian southern grouping of forces, repelled Ukrainian attack attempts in the vicinity of Berkovka Reservoir. Further sources from October 27 suggest that the Russians captured some areas west of Kurdyumovka. The Ukrainian General Staff reported repelling 5 Russian attacks in the area of Bohdanivka and Kromov, and over 10 other attacks in the vicinity of Klishchiivka and Andriivka. Fityo reported that there had been 20 skirmishes with the enemy in the last 24 hours. Geolocation-based materials from October 26 indicate Russian troop movements south of the Vasilivka, and described Russian forces as seeking to seize the initiative in the Bakhmut area. Another Russian media source suggested that Russian forces had captured the area northeast of Kromo and on October 26 took over positions near the railway line east of Klishchiivka. On October 27th, Russian troops continued their offensive near Avdiivka but did not achieve any significant successes. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that it repelled over 20 Russian attacks in various places, including in Stepove, Avdiivka, and Pervomaisky. However, Russian mill bloggers reported that Russian troops achieved some successes in the vicinity of Opitny and the T-0505 highway, but there was no confirmation from ISW. Ukrainian military observers confirmed that the Russians approached the Avdiivka coking plant and took control of the waste heap. Russian forces are reported to have had varying degrees of success, but overall, only modest progress has been made since the beginning of the major offensive on October 10th. Kostyantin Mashevets, a Ukrainian military observer, provided details on the deployment of Russian units in the Avdiivka area. He emphasized the presence of many brigades and regiments from various military districts of Russia, operating on different flanks of Avdiivka. External sources indicate heavy losses and morale problems among Russian troops. John Kirby of the U.S. National Security Council said the Russians lost thousands of troops and at least 125 armored vehicles in the latest offensive. He also pointed to executions of Russian soldiers who refused to follow orders and threats to shoot units that would retreat. Russian sources describe morale in their troops as very low. A battalion called Bohdan Khmelnytsky, composed of Ukrainian prisoners of war, was incorporated into the Russian military structure. On October 27th, the Russian state-controlled media, RIA Novosti, reported that this battalion would be redeployed to the Ukrainian front line after taking the oath. It should be emphasized that forcing prisoners of war to participate in an armed conflict is contrary to the Geneva Convention, which clearly states that prisoners of war should not be placed in places directly exposed to hostilities. The battalion was formed in February in the area of the Donetsk Oblast controlled by Russia. According to the alleged commander of the unit, Andriy Tishchenko, around 70 Ukrainian prisoners of war joined him at that time. Nevertheless, RIA Novosti calls the battalion volunteer, suggesting that all its members joined it of their own free will after accepting Russian citizenship. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, which took place on February 24, 2022, Russia allegedly recruited thousands of Ukrainian citizens in the occupied regions, forcing them to fight against their own state. Many of these recruits probably died in combat because, according to sources, they are used by Russia to identify the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces and as cover for units gathered on Russian territory. Lubinets mentioned receiving dozens of videos that appear to show executions of Ukrainian prisoners by the Russian military. The Russian armed forces have been repeatedly accused of brutal treatment of Ukrainian prisoners and violations of international legal norms. On April 17th, Ukraine's ombudsman, Dmytro. Additionally, on July 28th and 29th of the year 2022, over 50 Ukrainian prisoners were killed and 75 were wounded as a result of an explosion in Olenivka, controlled by Russia, on July 28 and 29th. The authorities in Kiev described this event as a conscious war crime committed by Russia. Ukrainian troops continued offensive operations in the western part of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, but on October 27, there were no confirmed successes. A blogger specializing in military issues from Russia suggested that Ukrainian units had slightly moved towards Robotyne, which lies 10 kilometers south of Orakov. The same blogger reported that Russian troops had abandoned their positions near Nesteryanka, 12 kilometers northwest of Robotyne, after a Ukrainian counterstrike in the area. According to Russian sources, on October 26th and 27th, Ukrainian soldiers attacked areas northwest of Verbove, 9 kilometers east of Robotyne, as well as in the areas of Nesteryanka, Kopany, Rivne, Robotyne, and Novoprokopivka. The Russian Ministry of Defense assured that in the previous week, Ukrainian forces made 19 unsuccessful attack attempts in the vicinity of Robotyne and Verbove. On the other hand, Russian units also conducted offensive operations in the western part of the Zaporizhia Oblast, but on October 27, there were no alleged or confirmed advances on their part. The Ukrainian General Staff reported unsuccessful Russian attacks near Verbove. Another claim made by a Russian military blogger would be that on October 26, Russian troops drove Ukrainian units out of the area around Verbove and launched a series of counterattacks along the Kopany-Robotyne-Novoprokopivka-Verbove line. The Central Bank of Russia decided on October 27 to increase the basic interest rate to 15% in response to rising inflation and the weakening of the ruble. Policymakers have already taken 4 such actions this year, increasing borrowing costs. Since July, the total increase in interest rates has been 7.5 percentage points, with the latest revision bringing an increase of 200 basis points. In an official statement, the bank indicated that current inflation pressures exceed the forecasts of the Central Bank of Russia. Interestingly, such a decision was announced just after Russian legislators decided to increase the defense budget by 68% in 2024. Even earlier, on August 15th, Russia made a sudden decision to raise interest rates to 12% in response to the drastic weakening of the ruble that had occurred following Russia's intensification of hostilities. The Russia-Ukraine conflict had an impact on global prices, partly due to problems with food and energy supplies. Nevertheless, tight sanctions imposed by Western countries left the Russian economy isolated, even as state spending continued to grow. The bank also emphasized that internal demand is systematically growing, exceeding the capacity to expand production and provide services.